Alana Lynn, and welcome to this episode of Ashes to Aligned. Over the years, there are events and moments that stand out. They're like snapshots that maybe in that moment weren't major turning points, but I can look back and see they led to the turning point or the breakthrough. One of these snapshot moments happened in the early spring of 2018 when I tried to get out of bed and collapsed right back onto it because I didn't have enough strength or energy to actually move myself across the bedroom floor. And that small but mighty inner voice delivered a very powerful message that I can still hear today. I had moved to San Diego in August of 2017. I shared in the last episode that I always laugh and say that was my grand delusion because my sons had been living in Orange County, just south of LA, when I started planning my move. I thought that I could move to San Diego, which was 2 hours away, and be close enough to more easily manage the constant ongoing crises, but not be too close to have my life significantly impacted. By the time I actually moved in August of 2017, Dusty, my oldest, had found his way back home and was living with me full time. And even though I said, when I move to San Diego, you are not going to live with me, he did anyway. Let me back up to the year before so you know how we got there. In March of 2016, my husband Charles had a stroke. It was a potential side effect of one of the medications he had been on since 2011. After his stroke, he started off in the hospital at Duke, and then they transferred him to our local hospital for rehab. He had lost the use of his right side, and they were hoping that physical therapy would help. But because of the stroke, they had to stop all of his treatments. And that resulted in a serious rebound effect and swelling in his brain. So he just continued to deteriorate rather than get better. And it got to the point that we needed to bring him home from the hospital under hospice care. And I knew that the boys needed to see him, despite me swearing, you will never, ever come back here again after everything that had happened the previous Christmas. So I booked flights and I got them home the same day we brought Charles home from the hospital, which was a Thursday. There was so much going on, and they were both in active addiction, which meant they couldn't just stop using because their dad was dying. I mean, they could have, but if you've ever watched someone go through withdrawals, it's not pretty. And me nor anyone else needed to be dealing with that on top of taking care of Charles. We were taking care of Charles's needs to make sure he was as comfortable as possible. And I was determined to make his remaining days on earth as beautiful as they could possibly be given the circumstances. So once a day, I would transfer money from our checking account into one of our son's checking accounts so they could go pick up and not get sick and go through the withdrawals and not put anyone else at risk of having money disappear from a wallet or a purse because the boys had gotten desperate. When I booked their flights to bring them home, they were scheduled to arrive on a Thursday and go back on Sunday. That's as long as I was willing to have them at home. And late Friday evening into Saturday, it was becoming more obvious Charles wasn't going to be with us many more days. So I started making arrangements to reschedule their return flights. And Dusty came to me and said, Mom, send me back on Sunday. And I said, what? And he said, Mom, your priority needs to be taking care of Charles. You shouldn't have to be dealing with mine and Gray's bullshit on top of that. Gray needs to stay. Charles is his biological dad, and while he's my dad too, it's more important that Gray stay. And Charles had raised Dusty since he was 5, and he called him Dad. So that's why he worded it that way. You know, he's my dad too, but he's Gray's biological dad. So Dusty went back to California on Sunday, and Charles died on Monday morning. Dusty wasn't there with all of the family that morning. He was in California alone. He wasn't with us for the funeral, so he didn't get the closure that came with the formality of that process. And I've told him many times that that was one of the kindest and most loving things anyone has ever done for me because it was a tremendous personal sacrifice for him emotionally. And I know it eats at him that he was in that position in the first place to have to make that choice. And it's another example of why I get so angry when people say addicts don't care. They care so deeply. And I want to help as many moms and wives and sisters and friends as I can to get better and recover themselves so that we stop putting even more pressure in piling even more crap on top of our person so we can actually be a support person for them when they're ready rather than just being one more weight they have to carry. So back to 2016. Fast forward to December 18th of 2016. I flew to Arizona to spend a few days with my parents before Christmas. I've never done this before or since, but I rented a car and drove from the Tucson airport to my parents' house because I was going to need to get a rental a few days later anyway when I went over to Huntington Beach, California to spend a few days with the boys for Christmas. So I said to my parents, I'll just pick up the rental while I'm at the airport and not have to have you guys, meaning my parents, come to Tucson and get me or bring me back later in the week when I need to come back and pick up my car. My parents live in a very remote area, about an hour and a half southeast of Tucson. Cell service can be very splotchy. And around 8:30 the next morning, my phone either connected to Wi-Fi or I got a burst of cell service because every app I had literally started pinging with notifications that my sister-in-law from my first marriage was trying to reach me. Obviously, something was very wrong, and I expected her to be calling to tell me something had happened to one of her parents. And of course, she would reach out to me because she didn't have a way to reach Dusty directly. She was calling to tell me that Billy, my first husband, Dusty's dad, had died the night before. Billy and I had a unique relationship. We were high school sweethearts, and we would break up and then we would stay best friends. And after about 6 months, we'd say, why did we break up again? And then we would get back together. And then after a while, usually about 6, 8 months, we'd say, this is why we broke up. We're nothing alike. And we repeated that cycle for years. We didn't work because we were so opposite, not because we didn't love each other. We would argue like crazy sometimes, but we loved each other very much. And I was devastated when I got that call. And after I got myself together, I told Mom I got to pack my car and I've got to get to LA and tell Dusty. Of course, before I was even like 2 hours into my 8 hour drive, people started posting on Facebook and tagging Dusty and I. So I had to call him. Thankfully, back in those days, he had a cell phone and I could reach him if I needed to. So I called him and told him what had happened. I let him know I was on the road. I was on my way to him. The Gray would be coming up from Huntington Beach to meet us and we would all be with him. At that time, Dusty was in LA. I don't know why. I mean, I guess I don't know how he ended up in LA. I could probably think back and figure it all out, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is he was in LA and he definitely had connections there because when I got to the hotel that he was staying at, he wasn't there. And after about 2 hours with no sign of Dusty, Gray looked at me and said, I need to borrow your car. I think I know where he is. I think he's in the orange tent. And it was a rental car, and Gray wasn't authorized to drive it. So after several minutes of Gray arguing and saying, "You're not going where I'm going," and me saying, "Well, wherever you're going, wherever this orange tent is, I'm obviously not letting you go alone." So we finally both got in my rental, and a few minutes later, I found myself at the notorious Skid Row. It was exactly as I'd always heard it portrayed over the years. Oh, and it's so sad what I saw as I circled the area for 2 hours, maybe a little more, while Gray tried to convince Dusty to come out of the orange tent. I saw a documentary a few years later of Skid Row. It had an aerial view of Skid Row, and there was an orange tent. I don't know if it was the same one or not, um, but I only saw one in that video. It really took me back. And after 2 hours, Gray finally got Dusty into the car. Now, Dusty's relationship with his dad was unconventional. They didn't have much of a relationship when Dusty was little. His dad left when he was 3 months old, and Dusty only saw him once a year or so after that until Dusty became an adult and addiction entered his life. His dad struggled with addiction too, so he was a good sounding board for Dusty and me. And Dusty once said, "He's exactly the dad I need now," because he understood Dusty's struggles. But we know how difficult it is to have a relationship with someone who is using. Imagine how difficult it is when both people in the relationship are struggling, sometimes using at the same time, sometimes one's clean, sometimes the other's not. That was Billy and Dusty's relationship. I'm going to share Dusty's Facebook post that he made a couple of days after Billy died. And I'm going to share the whole thing because it's great insight, not only into the situation with his father, as he calls him, but insight in general into the mind of an addict. The things that they think that most of us aren't aware of. And I've practiced this multiple times, and every time I've got really emotional. So that just tells me that this is a spot that I still need to do some healing around. I try not to edit my recordings too much, to just try to remain real and transparent, but this may be one that ends up heavily edited. Here's his post from December 21st of 2016. Most of you who I am relatively close with know that earlier this year my mom lost her amazing husband, and me and my brother lost our dad. While I will never claim to have been prepared for that, it wasn't a sudden or unexpected thing, but it has still been one of the most difficult things I've ever had to deal with. The day before yesterday, my biological father died. My relationship with my father throughout my life was troubled at best and absolutely horrific at worst. I hadn't seen him in several years, and the last time I did see him, we were both strung out. And that was about the only thing I ever had in common with him. My father's death was not expected, especially compared to when my dad died. But in all honesty, it was no more of a surprise either. There are a lot of things I wish I had said to both of these men, but there was nothing I needed to say to my dad that I didn't. And that's not the case with my father. And I'm reminded again how much I take for granted the people who bless me with their love. Someone said to me recently, years are easy, days are hard. And while I agree with them, I have to say that 2016 has been the most difficult year of my life. I would think that because of the way I have struggled through the year, that logically, I would have just naturally become more appreciative of all the amazing things I have in my life. But I haven't. I've become bitter and have started to treat the people that I care for the most with the same regard that I treat myself. And I think that is the biggest mistake I've ever made. I don't make New Year's resolutions or whatever, but this coming year and every year after that, I hope that I can do something different. I have a younger brother who I love being around, but I act like I don't. And I have two incredibly loving women in my life who obviously fill two very different roles in my life, but on their own would move mountains for me if I needed them to. Put them all together and they would make the earth stop rotating. There are a lot of things I want to do differently in the future, but right now, I want these three people to know that I love them and that I appreciate them. People come and go through our lives, but my life would absolutely not be the same if any one of those three people left. I didn't have the chance to say to my father the things that I wish I had. So now, while I have the chance to say it, I want to apologize for just saying the words and not showing you the way I should have over the course of the year just how much I love you. I also want to say thank you for still being here for me today so that hopefully I can show you how much I love you instead of just telling you that I do. I really have no idea what I would do without the three of you. I know that I would be absolutely miserable. And while this year has been extremely difficult, I have you. So no matter what happens, I know I'm the luckiest man alive. I love you. And then he tagged me, his girlfriend at the time, and Gray. And then a few days later, he shared his father's obituary and said, "It's strange to read my second obituary of one of my parents in just 1 year. Apparently, he loved me with his whole heart. I'm glad I know now." Okay, so why have I shared all that? One, I really want to show the world that addicts aren't bad people, that it's really important for everyone involved to differentiate between the addict and the disease of addiction. Addicts do some terrible things, but they aren't terrible people. Billy was one of the kindest, most compassionate and giving people you could ever meet. And so is Dusty. And I say it all the time. Addicts do care. My personal belief is they care too much. And they don't know how to process all that they're feeling a lot of times. So they use so they don't have to feel. I also wanted to share all of that to give background on how Dusty ended up living with me. So Billy passed away in December of 2016, but his parents didn't do a funeral then. They waited until June, the end of June, on what would have been Billy's 50th birthday. And because Dusty hadn't seen him for a couple of years, and because Dusty hadn't been in North Carolina for Charles's funeral, and just because in general, given the nature of their relationship, I felt like it would be really important for Dusty to be at his father's funeral with his grandparents, who he was, when he was younger, incredibly close to. I arranged for him to fly back to North Carolina so we could drive up to Ohio for his dad's celebration of life together. It took 4 days and a multitude of missed flights. I think there were 7 overall. And a new destination. Rather than him flying into Raleigh, he had missed so many flights, so many days in a row. I ended up flying him into Cincinnati, and he got there the day before the service. He was not good when he got there, and I believed if I sent him back to California, I would be sending him back to die. So I kept him with me. He ended up in the hospital about a week and a half later with sepsis again. And I was trying to pack up my house to get ready to move because I was moving to California. It was supposed to be the end of July. Closing got pushed back. I didn't leave till August. But anyway, so he stayed with me so I could help take care of him as he recovered from the sepsis. And he helped me pack the house to get ready to move. I say he helped, but really it was kind of hit or miss. I was still grateful to have him with me on the cross country drive, especially with 2 cats in the car. And when I got to San Diego, I found an apartment to move into. It was this beautiful, incredible dream apartment. And he helped me move my stuff in. And then he helped me unpack. And time just passed. And he was still there. And and that's how things happen when you're living in crisis mode. We say, "I would never do that," or "That's a line I would never cross." And then something happens and we move a little closer to that line. And then something else happens and we inch forward just a little bit more. and a little bit more. And our old self, who had clear boundaries and was very certain what they would or wouldn't do, gets farther and farther in our rear view. And that crazy thing that we swore we would never do gets closer and closer. And it gets more normal. If not more normal, at least less extreme. And we think, well, I've gone this far, why not? Or in for a penny, in for a pound. Our normal changes, at least in our mind. And that's the way it was with Dusty. When I got to San Diego in 2017, he was still recovering from sepsis the second time in 6 months. I was struggling to adapt to life in a new town, a new state, the complete opposite side of the country. And Dusty and I have always been incredibly close. We talk about music and movies and TV shows and quantum physics and our spiritual sides. For the most part, I enjoy having him around. He is very different in his addiction than Gray was. Gray was volatile. He was hateful. Dusty's more apathetic. He still draws. He's a very talented artist. He still makes music. He doesn't do shit around the house to help or even pick up after himself. But for the most part, he's quieter. He's less disruptive. And in every situation that we remain in, even when we know it's not a good place or a healthy place for us to be, we experience some sort of payoff. And I'll talk about this more in another episode, but even though it was incredibly difficult at times to allow Dusty to keep living with me, the payoff was I wasn't alone. I had someone to watch TV with in the evening, someone to hang out with and talk about music and movies and rap wars and lots of things with. So there was the payoff for allowing him to stay. I would complain about the mess he made and the little things he did that caused me frustration. But at the end of the day, I was the one who allowed him to live with me. So I had to accept responsibility for those frustrations. Now, as time progressed, tensions between him and I did continue to grow. And Gray and I had committed to doing a TV special for TLC, the network TLC, called This Is Life Live. The episode focused on Gray's accident and all that happened in the 5 years since. So in early April, a television crew came to North Carolina and did pre-recorded interviews with the family and friends of the girl who died in Gray's accident. Then they came to San Diego and did the same with Gray and I. And we were scheduled to meet with them on live television when the show aired in May. It was around Mother's Day that year. I think it was like the 15th or something like that. We had committed to not only the network, but also to Liz's family, who we both really wanted to meet. So I felt like I had a responsibility to make sure Gray stayed alive for the next 5 to 6 weeks until we got through that show. So he came to my came to my apartment in San Diego to record that TV show. And I think for the most part, he ended up staying with me for the next 6 weeks. He didn't really leave. That period of time was the pinnacle of chaos and turmoil. Constant fights between Dusty and Gray, me and Gray, the three of us. And one morning I stood up to get out of bed. I weaved a little bit, and then I collapsed right back down on the bed. And I heard that small inner voice say, "You could literally destroy yourself trying to save them, and there's no guarantee it would work." In fact, it probably wouldn't, because they'd be so consumed with guilt over what they'd, quote, done to mom, they would spiral even worse. That's one of those moments that was a huge defining turning point for me. Nothing happened that day. It wasn't an immediate change, but I can still hear that voice even today. And so it stuck with me. And in the last episode, I talked about recovery not being this huge dramatic declaration. It's just a series of realizations, recognitions, taking small steps towards reclaiming our lives. And that morning was a huge, literal wake up call for me because I realized the truth in those words. And while it seemed heroic for me to sacrifice myself to save my sons, at least in my mind, I mean, most moms would jump in front of a bullet or a speeding train to save their child. But when the child or the partner or the spouse or whatever the relationship dynamic may be is the one driving the train, our sacrifice to save them only piles on more guilt and shame. And that doesn't help them or us. The most loving thing you can do is model what healing and recovery looks like, show them what's possible without demanding they catch up. So if you're running yourself into the ground, trying to save someone else, please stop, even if it's just for today. I invite you to sit with this question. What would it look like if I started saving myself instead? If this message landed for you, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment or you can send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook. Please know you're not alone in this and you don't have to figure it all out at once. You just need to stop bleeding out for someone else who hasn't even asked for a Band-Aid. Just breathe and know you're allowed to take up space in your own story again.